What do fried chicken sandwiches have in common with mid-range dive watches? There are a lot of them, everybody likes them, but what else? Yema have their own mid-range dive watch, the Superman, and now the Superman Slim with their in-house movement. This watch got me thinking about fried chicken sandwiches, about convergence, about risk-taking, and about staying out of the crowd in this hyper-competitive segment of the watch market. Let's dive in. I did something I've never done before. When I saw this watch online, it got the gears turning about those fried chicken sandwiches. So I wrote to Yema. I wrote and I asked if they would be willing to send me a watch on loan so I could include some more interesting B-roll, but also get my hands on the watch. Yema isn't in any stores in my country, so that was the only way it was going to happen. Yema said yes. This was a big step for me because I pride myself on being independent. What would my viewers think? Would some insinuate that I'm getting paid? I'm not, but I'm taking a chance. I honestly couldn't care less whether or not you buy this watch. Buy it, don't, doesn't matter to me. What I do get though is some interesting B-roll and hands-on with a watch I otherwise wouldn't have had hands-on with. And you also get a better video instead of me just using stock footage. This video is going to have 3 parts. First, I'll cover the basic specs and details. Then I'll briefly touch on my own personal preferences regarding this watch, strengths and weaknesses, if you will, and then the meat and potatoes of this video, fried chicken sandwiches. We have our classic dive watch. It has 300 meters of water resistance. The case is 39 millimeters in diameter. The lug to lug is 48 millimeters, which is almost to the millimeter the same as a Rolex Submariner. The case is 11.8 millimeters in height, so it definitely is slim. It's not quite Bulgari Octo Finissimo slim, but it's on the low end. A Seamaster 300M is closer to 13.5 millimeters, depending on the model. You get a classic dive bezel in a bright blue and a corresponding milky blue, almost lacquered looking dial with simple rounded and rectangular plots. The bezel has the signature Yema locking mechanism, which locks the bezel into place so that you don't accidentally move the bezel during use. The bracelet is a very Yema specific design, which they call the scale bracelet. It's not your standard fare, oyster, jubilee, beads of rice, or other common style of bracelet. The clasp is similar to the one you'll find on a Seiko SPP model. Inside, you have the Yema in-house manufacturer micro rotor automatic movement. It's black coated, 70 hours of power reserve, +3, -7 accuracy, which isn't COSC, but it's better spec than most Seikos on paper for sure. And the price, $2,500. Overall, that's a lot of specs for the price point for sure. Monta have models that will set you back a ballpark similar amount. You can get non-manufacturer movement watches cheaper, and you can get some watches that are a bit more premium. All in all, not badly priced. Do I like this watch? Yes, I do. I think it's very attractive. It's not more complicated than that. It looks good, it wears well, it feels and looks well made. It's also interesting to look at. But let's start with the concerns I had before it arrived and whether or not they were justified. The bracelet is a very unique design, and like a Royal Oak bracelet, it doesn't lay flat or articulate that much. It also flares out from the case, and I was, like most people online, worried if it would make it less wearable than a 48 millimeter lug to lug would indicate. 48 millimeters is typically very good for me, and the truth is, yes, it does flare. If you have smaller wrists, you are going to have a gap and some flare that you likely don't like, but on my wrist, it's not a problem at all. So for me, happy days. If you also use flat lay watch rolls, you'll be annoyed by this design, as this bracelet either needs to be taken off to lay flat, like a Cartier Santos, or it has to go into an actual watch box. But honestly, this is a bit of a niche problem, but I overthink things, so I just included it in the description as well. To add to that, I like the style of bracelet, if for no other reason that I'm so used to the ubiquitous Oyster, Jubilee, H-Link or L-Link and other styles of bracelets we see so often. There is very close to nothing like this bracelet, which I think is very cool. It's a bracelet that comes across as classy. This is more in line with the experience you get from wearing a Jubilee over something more toolish like an Oyster bracelet. There's enough polish there to just make the watch have a more luxurious aesthetic. The bracelet is a signature piece of this overall watch design, that's for sure, and not a lot of watches do anything remotely similar. The clasp itself, on the other hand, no big surprise. It's kind of a cliche these days, but clasps are a place where some brands save money to hit a price point. Is it a bad clasp? No, it just doesn't have all those cool things you might expect in or around the price range. There's no easy adjust. It's not of the quality of a milled Rolex Oyster bracelet. But Seiko doesn't offer anything much better at this retail price. Christopher Ward do, so too do Monta, but it's a very nice bracelet. It's solid, but most importantly, aesthetically, the bracelet has a much more distinctive design choice. My second concern, the dial is a little on the plain side. There's not a lot going on. Is that a good or a bad? It's neither. It's an aesthetic. An IWC Pilot Mark 20 in black doesn't have a lot going on either, and people would complain if there was a lot going on. If you're expecting applied metallic markers and a sunray dial, well, then this is not the dial for you. I also think that since this fundamentally is a skin diver, a not overly spiffed up dial is the right direction to take on a watch like this. I would also argue that when you have that bracelet, which is very eye-catching, I think it works well in tandem with a more restrained dial. I caught myself thinking about how a super colorful paisley tie is something you can wear, but you're not going to wear it on anything other than a toned down suit. A paisley tie with a paisley shirt and a pinstripe suit is going to be far too much to handle. Then there's the locking mechanism for the bezel. It's a super simple mechanism. Rolex would clearly have designed something far more complicated and over-engineered. A Panerai Luminor crown guard locking mechanism is much more solid and convincingly engineered. But as a bezel guard or bezel lock, it works, it's sturdy, and it adds a little bit of character to the watch that is lacking in something like an Oris Divers 65 or a Vulcain. So it's a little bit simplistic, but it's also cool. Again, like the bracelet and the dial, it'll be this question of aesthetics, which is a big plus, over engineering and practicality, which may lead some to another conclusion. Then there's the movement. In this price range, movements are typically massively uninteresting. A display case back with a random Sellita SW200 with a custom rotor is likely what you're going to see. And that Sellita is going to be a workhorse. It's reliable, but it's boring. You can't see anything, and full-size rotors just aren't that aesthetically exciting. This movement, because it's black, fits the case and has a micro rotor, which looks cool. Spec-wise, it has what I expect, maybe even on the high end in terms of accuracy and power reserve. Now we start talking about fried chicken. Yema is a smaller brand that has been around since after the Second World War. They are like so many others trying to make an even bigger name for themselves in what is likely the most hyper-competitive space in watches. From $1,000 to $3,000, you get everything from Christopher Ward to Seiko to Longines. And all three of those brands have dive watches that are cheaper than this watch. You can get a cheaper Yema as well, down to $1,400 for a model without this specific high-grade in-house movement. There are other differences. There's no doubt that more work has been put not only into the movement, but also into the bracelet, the case, and the dial. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's also something like the Monta that have a watch for just around $2,500, the Oceanking. There's Oris with the Divers 65, which is also somewhere around that price, depending on, among other things, the movement, but not only. Then there's also something like a Vulcain. They also have one. This is a watch where there are a ton of competitors and a ton of dive watch offerings. The thing about this space is that it's a lot like the market for fried chicken sandwiches. Every brand has an option. Some are cheaper, some are more expensive, but many have one because those fried chicken sandwiches are ridiculously popular. Any self-respecting fast food chain has to have their version of that type of sandwich. Even classic burger-only places have had to make an active decision as to whether or not they should also offer a fried chicken sandwich. But there's a problem with all those fried chicken sandwiches. It's that they more or less all conform to the same conventions. It comes down to the bun, the sauce, the spice, the condiments like pickles, and of course, the chicken. Starting with movements. This is the price range where pretty much anybody can give a manufacturer like Sellita a call and ask for an off-the-shelf movement. Sellita has different grades and qualities of each movement, so you can get the absolute bog standard SW200, or you can go upscale and get it spec'd to your need and even finish it in-house with your custom rotors and some detailing on the 3/4 plate. Oris has used Sellita, Christopher Ward has used Sellita, Hublot uses Sellita, albeit in a completely more ridiculous price range. You see where I'm going? By going down this route, you reduce complexity in your manufacturing, lowering cost, and if you choose someone like Sellita specifically, you get a reliable workhorse movement that is also regarded as easily serviceable. And the buyers? Most of them probably don't really care that much about the movement. Remember, if you're watching me, you already not a normal watch consumer. You're likely just a teeny bit down that rabbit hole, so you have opinions on Sellita, but most consumers don't. But you can go another route as a manufacturer. You can make your own movement. By default, this would usually mean that you move well out of this price range. Research and development on movements is not cheap, and I would make the argument that from a profit maximization perspective, it's usually a losing proposition. The kind of volumes you potentially need to get to recoup those R&D costs are not in reach of most of these smaller brands. Add to that, if you're a watch enthusiast, you definitely put yourself as a manufacturer into the firing line of people that question the longevity, the reliability, and the serviceability of this in-house movement. Why take the chance on a more expensive, unproven movement that may be expensive to service when you can go for something as safe like a Sellita? It's not a given that an in-house movement is a strong selling point for anyone but the absolute biggest fans of the brand. Yema aren't alone in this. Christopher Ward also tried their hands at making an in-house movement, and for the time being at least, there are no current watches in the Christopher Ward lineup that use the movement. But the movement that Christopher Ward made did something important. It established CW's credentials to some extent as a real watchmaker. Maybe that's what Yema is doing as well. Yema does have watches like the Urban Field that still uses Sellita SW210, and they have other movements in-house and not in other models as well. Making a fully in-house movement, micro rotor and all, is not something you see a lot of. Like the pickle in a chicken sandwich, it's not at the center of the consumer's attention. The chicken is. So why put a whole lot of effort into differentiating on the pickle? It's not the safe approach. The Sellita is the safe approach. The Sellita is the pickle in the fried chicken sandwich. The Seiko NH movement is that same pickle. You pick the manufacturer and the grade that fits your price point and you're up and running. But an in-house movement, that's some version of homemade pickled kimchi. You're going to get noticed for your daring choice. But remember, most people just want that regular pickle and will avoid that kimchi even if it may be more interesting and more unique. Next are the bracelets, or what I consider the afterthought of the watch world. Mention a Seiko and people will complain to some extent about the bracelets. That can be a Seiko 5 or an SPB or an SJE or even a Grand Seiko. Somebody somewhere will have something bad to say about the Seiko bracelets. The absolute best brands out there offer a solid bracelet, solid end links with milled clasp, fully micro-adjustable extension mechanism and screw-in links. The cheapest, no easy adjust, stamped clasp, push pins. It's a question of choosing your price point because so many of these brands source their bracelet from some sub-vendor. And it's not just in this price range. It's been a while since I brought up this example, but Lange Odysseus, Glashütte CQ and IWC Mark20 priced for between $7,000 and $30,000, and they all get their clasp from the exact same manufacturer, Brogioli. All sourced, finished in-house, but not built from the bottom in-house. Just like the Sellita movement, you pick up the phone and order the bracelet to the spec you want, and because your investment is typically going into the case and dial, you're more often than not picking something on the inferior side. But how many off-the-shelf scale bracelets are there? To my knowledge, none. Monta, Oris, Seiko, Longines, it's some standard variant of an Oyster or 5-link. How many brands stand out on the bracelet in terms of design? Doxa does with their classic beads of rice bracelet, but the safe choice is the Oyster bracelet. You maybe bevel a little bit here or there, you maybe polish somewhere, but it's a variation on a theme. Or you consider something different. The tendency in this segment is to converge on the same suppliers and also on very similar designs and specs. But for some reason, Yema said we want to make our own cool bracelet. No, it doesn't have quick adjust. Yes, it flares, which is going to make it less wearable for some people with smaller wrists. But it looks different. They've put effort into a different approach. And maybe somebody will like it and think it's different. And it's likely a bit more expensive to do. For me, the bracelet is the bun of the fried chicken sandwich. And this design is not like upgrading the quality of the ingredients of the bun of that fried chicken sandwich. That's the machine clasp, the easy adjust mechanism. The scale bracelet is replacing the bun with some very different type of container. It might make for a better sandwich, but most customers only really care about the chicken and are happy with a brioche or potato bun and are willing to pay for an organic version of said brioche bun. But a scale bracelet is a completely different container. The case. To be a little bit simplistic, dive watches are the fried chicken sandwich of the watch market at the moment. There are variants. There's the skin diver. It's small, it's thin, it has a very basic case, it wears small on the wrist. Examples are the Glasssuit CQ, the Seiko 62 MAS models like the SJE093, the Oris Divers 65, the Black Bay 54. Then there's the chunky manly diver. It's simple, it's got a classic design but more beefy. It's the Hydroconquest, it's the Monta Oceanking. Then you have the chunky pro divers, the undefinable Plo-Profs, their Aquest 5000s. And finally, you get the dive watches with weird cases like the Doxa 300M or the Willard or the Panerais. What we see most is the skin diver, the Black Bays and the 62 MAS type watches. They are the most fried chicken of all case designs at the moment. They are easy on the eye, they are relatively simple to produce, they are versatile and usually sized for the modern consumer. This isn't a place where a brand like Yema bucks the trend a whole lot. This is a skin diver case. Considering how a SkyQuest has strong similarities to a Hydroconquest and an Oris has with the Vulcain, the Yema case is not the most daring, but still with some small touches that are attempts to give it its own personality and have it stand out. But it is instantly recognizable as a skin diver. And this is how we know that it's Yema's version of a fried chicken sandwich. Finally, there's the dial. The dial is where the money often goes. This is where you typically see that premiumization that Morgan Stanley keeps talking about. If you want your watch to look affordable and you want it to be cheap, you have a simple dial. If you want to charge extra and you want it to a premium, you get lume plots with metallic surrounds, you get more high polish, you might get a sunray or textured or lacquered dial. These are the general rules you see. From the Tudor Ranger to the Rolex Explorer, it's the plots that make the one watch look rugged and the other look expensive. Give me your gut reaction. Which dial looks most expensive? A Doxa or a Christopher Ward C60? The C60 looks more premium, but it's significantly cheaper. Why does it look more premium? Because of the plots, because of the dial details. The Yema has a milky texture to the blue dial, which looks very cool, but it is plain. I said before that I think it's necessary to suit the case and the bracelet, but you know what it doesn't do? It doesn't follow that premium convention. The dial does not look like a $2,500 watch dial. The C60 dial looks way more premium and costs less than half. This isn't a mistake, but it's an unusual choice. I know I'm getting to the point where I'm really stretching this analogy of fried chicken, but to me, the dial is the chicken and the breading. It's the taste, the texture, and the crunch. This is what people notice. And Yema has a simple toolish dial, but there's just not that extra crunch that signifies that this is a premium sandwich. This is a relatively speaking more expensive fried chicken sandwich, but it's not because of organic, ethically sourced chicken and homemade panko. It's just regular, reasonably good chicken when you look at the dial, which is where we put all this together. In this hyper-competitive price range, in this hyper-competitive space, innovation in design like you see in the Richard Mille or Grübel Force space isn't there. At $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 and even $4,000, going all in on super creative built from the bottom watches is just not feasible. It'll never be profitable. So you have to make some clear choices and compromises about where you want to invest that creativity. You can't be creative everywhere. That'll be too expensive, just as it is with fried chicken sandwiches. The fried chicken sandwich consists of the bun. That's the bracelet. Why? Because people want a good bun or a good bracelet with all those cool features, but they don't want or expect anything particularly innovative when it comes to that container. There's the movement. It's the pickle. People are fine with regular pickle. Most people are fine with a regular Salita movement. Being creative and driving up costs here is not typically what consumers care about or value. It might even be a negative for some reason that it's in-house kimchi for whatever reason. The case is the chicken on its own. Dive watches are the fried chicken sandwiches of today's market, and this is Yema's version. Except for the bezel lock, it's very much in line with contemporary tastes. It's small, it's easy wearing, it's premium. And finally, the dial, the crunch of the chicken. For $2,500, you are expecting a lot more crunch. You are expecting applied markers, sunray dials, and you don't get that here. You get a simple, clean aesthetic that works really well with the bracelet. But the key point here is that for the price, some people will think, really? That much for this plain dial? And that's the interesting thing about this watch. In this segment, the tendency is to make not just your standard version of the ubiquitous fried chicken sandwich. More specifically, you as a manufacturer will tend to follow the conventional wisdom as to what consumers are looking for. The safe choice is the high quality oyster bracelet. The safe choice is the high grade Salita movement. The safe choice is a premium looking dial, at least at $2,500. At $1,000 we expect certain things, whereas at $2,500 people start to expect other things. And Yema with this watch does not conform to those typical expectations. This is how you fundamentally end up with that chicken sandwich with your version of a spicy sauce that has kind of the same spice level as everybody else's, has kind of the same squishiness of the bread and the kind of same sourness of the pickles and the same quality of chicken. Everybody's playing in the same market, largely at least. They are trying to sell to the same customers. So you inevitably end up making the same product decisions, and all those sandwiches end up being not particularly different. They are more variations of a theme than being particularly standout unique. Look at a Monta SkyQuest GMT compared to a Longines Hydroconquest GMT. Look at an Oris Divers 65 versus a Vulcain diver. Consider the Black Bay Pro with a Longines Spirit Zulu time from Hodinkee. There are so many examples of this. They're all in many ways similar in terms of internals, in terms of dial conventions, in terms of bracelets, all the stuff I've pointed out. There are a lot of non-safe choices in the Yema. There are idiosyncrasies and design decisions that are contrary to what a brand should do from a market perspective. And to me, that's why I asked to borrow the watch, because this doesn't happen often. And the watch to me clearly illustrates this tendency to conform and converge on very similar watch construction conventions. The manufacturers end up operating within a very constrained aesthetic framework, and the Yema doesn't. Does that make a watch like this worth buying? I'm no better than the rest. I generally like that regular, predictable style of fried chicken sandwich. I have my preferences when it comes to pickle or no pickle. I have a predictable preference when it comes to the level of spice. Same with watches. I gravitate towards a Seiko 62 MAS design or a Glashütte CQ or a Black Bay 54. But it also gets very samey. Sometimes I want that Seiko Willard quirkiness or the character of a Doxa 300T. It doesn't happen as often as I like the Black Bay 54. So Yema have made some very active choices to stand out from the crowd, which honestly isn't the safe bet. Will you like their choices? You might not, but they are taking some chances. If for no other reason than that, I think Yema deserves a bit of respect, because it's the brands that take a little bit of a chance every now and again, because that's usually where the next big thing comes from. It's the ones that try something different. You can ride the wave, or you can try and create the next wave. Odds are 9 times out of 10, I'll still buy a more standard fried chicken sandwich. But on one of those rare occasions where I'm looking for something different, it's good to know that there are some manufacturers out there giving me a few more distinctive options. Does that make sense? I hope so. So here's 2 questions for you. What do you think of this watch and Yema? And second question, which brands do you feel are not converging completely, are trying something different that might catch on? Who's on the verge of serving us the next big trend? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.